Hello and welcome everyone. And today we have a very special guest with us today. We have Pablo from Dreaming Spanish. If you're not sure what Dreaming Spanish is, basically this is what EnglishSponge was inspired by. Really, it was Pablo from Dreaming Spanish who really was the first person to come up with a platform where you could watch comprehensible input videos over and over again. So welcome, Pablo. And if you just want to quickly introduce yourself to the people at EnglishSponge here.
Hi, thank you, James, for having me over. And yes, I'm Pablo, and yeah, I started Dreaming Spanish. That's now just called Dreaming because now we also have French. And I started it as a YouTube channel just because I knew that there was a better way to learn languages. I wanted to show people that you can learn languages with comprehensible input. But this kind of content, for beginner or intermediate learners to learn uniquely through input, just didn't exist. I just couldn't find any of it. So I thought, okay, I'll have to make it myself to show other people that this can be made, that this works.
Great. And obviously, so we've been very much inspired by Dreaming Spanish. I just quickly asked Pablo, have you taken a look at the EnglishSponge website? What do you think of what you've seen on there?
Yeah, I took a look and I saw that you have like many options for filtering, for finding content that you find interesting. It's a bit kind of similar to ours, but I think it's good. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I hope we can increase the number of videos we have. We have about 600 so far. Hopefully we can get a few thousand. Okay, so the first question I want to ask is how many languages do you actually speak at the moment? And at what levels can you speak them?
I can speak 6 languages. I'm a native speaker of Spanish and Catalan. And then I learned English, I learned French, Japanese, and Thai. So those are 6. Now I'm learning also Mandarin Chinese. I'm still not fluent in it.
Yes, and so what level do you think you have at Mandarin Chinese? And also, how are you learning it? What method are you using to try and learn it?
So for Chinese, I would say I'm at a kind of high intermediate. I've already been able to understood intermediate learner videos on YouTube from CI Chinese channels for quite a while already, and I'm comfortable watching even the content that they mark as advanced. That from my point of view, it's still not as advanced as trying to watch an actual Chinese YouTuber or regular Chinese people like having a conversation, right? So I can understand those just fine. And I am learning with comprehensible input. I started learning Chinese doing crosstalk, sitting down with a Chinese speaker and drawing our life, drawing our family, telling stories to each other. And once I got to the intermediate level, I continued doing that, but online through video calls with Chinese speakers. And as other channels started imitating our approach and started making videos like Dreaming Spanish, but in Chinese, we started getting a lot of content for learners on YouTube. And now there are so many channels, so I can pick my favorite creators and watch their videos. Which is awesome, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to do what I did. And it's that, well, if we're having success, then of course people are gonna imitate us, and that's also shows that you're being successful, right?
So with Chinese, have you done like pure comprehensible input, or have you? Because I know that the writing system for Chinese is obviously very kind of completely different from Spanish. Did you not have to do any studying of the characters of Chinese? Has it been just comprehensible input, or have you done anything else to learn Chinese apart from that?
So for Chinese, I did a little bit of kind of traditional learning many years ago before I knew what comprehensible input was. And I think that's the reason why I gave up. It was just too boring to study with textbooks. So yeah, but that was many years ago. But this time when I really got serious about learning it, then yeah, I started learning only with comprehensible input. That being said, when I started learning Chinese, I was already able to read Japanese. So I already know many of the characters. And the way I learned the Japanese characters was using the book Remembering the Kanji, in which you learn the characters with mnemonics. You create a story that includes all the different elements that can appear in characters, because the elements of both the Japanese and Chinese characters, they reuse a lot of elements. So with this approach, with these mnemonics, you assign a meaning to each of the parts and then kind of tie them together in a story. And at the end of the story, you have the meaning of the character itself. So this makes it super easy to learn the characters. And I learned the first 2,000 Japanese characters in 50 days. And then this was before I went to live in Japan. And then for the rest of the kind of 6 months that I was learning Japanese before going to Japan, I finished learning the 3,000 most common characters. So this makes it so much easier for me to be able to read and write Chinese, that I can basically just not have to do anything and just get used to how the characters, yes, they're used in a bit of a different way in Chinese. There are a few characters that are common in Chinese that I had never seen in Japanese, because in Japanese maybe they're not used, or they're used very, very little, very infrequently. But because I'm already so used to the concept of the characters, it still becomes very easy for me to remember new characters and associate them with the words that I have already learned in Chinese. That for now, I'm not doing anything in particular to practice reading other than what I naturally get from just seeing words written around, sometimes watching videos that just happen to include subtitles. That is enough for me to just be able to learn to read at the same time as I'm learning to understand what I hear. Right.
I've always wondered sort of how this method works with like languages with a completely different writing system. I've only really learned Spanish, so I haven't had too much experience with a really different language. But it sounds like you may need a little bit of study of the characters, would you say? Or would it be possible to learn Chinese just by learning comprehensible input and just like never learning any of the characters? Could you learn to listen and speak Chinese like without any study whatsoever?
You can learn to listen and speak. Learning to write, no, it's probably kind of impossible because you can kind of learn to read just by feeling, by having read a lot, but by having seen a lot of the characters in a situation in which you're maybe also hearing what they say, basically, and kind of getting a general feeling of the characters. That may be okay, but when you do that, your brain never really has a reason to look in detail at the characters, see which strokes they're made of. And usually your brain, what it does is it tries to do as little work as possible. And usually we'll just grab the one or two more like characteristic parts of that character and just remember those things and just be done with that, and not really focus or try to memorize anything else about the character that's not necessary like right now, right? So you're not going to be able to write them. If you want to be able to read Chinese, you could do that. I have my doubts that you're going to have enough resources to do this kind of association by feeling of like seeing the character and hearing it. I'm not sure that you're going to have enough content, enough resources to do this in a kind of systematic way that's going to allow you to get used to all the characters you need to get used to. So I would still recommend doing some study, and the same thing for languages like Thai, for example, that use a different script, even if it's not as complicated as Chinese. It's fine to study. This is not part of acquiring the language. Like learning a script, especially learning how to write it, is not directly connected to the acquisition of the grammar, the usage of the vocabulary. So even if you follow our method strictly, we don't necessarily recommend like avoiding studying other scripts or Chinese or Japanese writing. Yeah.
Like, I would like to speak a lot more about this. Sam from EnglishSponge has just started his journey with Chinese with the comprehensible input method, so I know he's going to be listening closely to what you're saying now.
Okay.
But let's talk a bit about. Sorry.
It's this, like the way I learned the Japanese kanji is kind of like magic. It was amazing how quickly you can do it. So for Japanese, there's the book Remembering the Kanji, and then there's the Chinese version Remembering the Hanzi. And you can use that together with an SRS software like Anki and create your own flashcards, and it works amazingly well. You can learn in a few months what takes maybe Chinese and Japanese kids maybe 6 or up to 10 years to learn.
As this is EnglishSponge, I do want to talk a little bit about English, because clearly you can speak English because you're doing it right now. I know that you learned English when you were at school, really, and using like the traditional method, generally speaking. Can you tell us a bit about how you learned English, but especially like what did you find particularly hard about English? Like what are some like specific things that you kind of found like hard specifically with learning English? I'd like to know a bit about that.
Well, with English, I learned in school like kind of everybody else in Spain. And I started learning a bit in primary school. I think we started when I was maybe 10. And we did 2 years of English in primary school. And then in secondary school, then kind of everybody studied English up to age 18. And we learned English, and I did well in my exams, but I finished high school and I wasn't really able to have a conversation in English. So the way I really learned, or I think that I really learned, was by first reading a lot. Like I was into computers. After high school, I started studying computer science in university, and we didn't have any English lessons. We didn't have an English course in university, but because of my interests and what I needed to learn for university, learn programming and stuff, so much of what I had to read was in English. And I was using a lot the internet, and so much stuff, so much information at that time was only in English that I wasn't trying to learn English, but I think I learned anyway just because of my exposure to reading so much English. To the point that I think it was in kind of fourth year of university that my university started offering 2 courses that were about computer science, but the teacher was speaking English in the course. And I was able to participate, and I understood it and was able to answer the teacher when the teacher, or the professor, you would say, in university, when the professor asked us any questions, I was able to reply, even though I had never really practiced speaking it. So I think I acquired a lot of the language through reading. And then on my 5th year of university, I wanted to go study abroad. In Europe, we have this Erasmus program that lets you go and study at a foreign university, usually within Europe, but still get credits for your own university. So you can study 1 year abroad, but you're not like held back from. You don't have to take more time to graduate from your own university. And you even get like a small scholarship. You get a little bit of money. And so I did that, and I wanted to do that, and kind of as a way to prepare myself for a whole year before that, I wanted to really make an effort and learn English. And I wanted to practice speaking because I had never really practiced speaking English at all. so I didn't have any confidence in my speaking. And I went on a website. At that time, there were already some websites to find language exchange partners. And I signed up, but I don't remember even if I sent anybody any messages or anything. But in the end, I just didn't do it. It was just too much work. I was just lazy. So I ended up doing the lazy thing, which is watching movies, watching series in English, listening to podcasts in English. At that time, I remember I had a little iPod video, and we already had video podcasts. So like podcasts, but when you download an episode, it's a video. It's not just an audio. I don't know if that even exists now, but at that time we already had that, and I would watch them in my little iPod on the train on the way to university. So I did that for 1 year before going to study abroad in Finland. I went to Finland, but the courses that I took were in English. And when I started university there, I really didn't have any problems. Like, I attended classes, I understood the classes, I was able to communicate with my professors, I was able to make friends with people from many countries and just have normal conversations in English with them without really having had to practice English before. It's true that around 1 week when I first moved there, I ended my days like really tired with like headaches from having had to like think so much about like how I was saying what I was saying, from trying to come up with words in English. But that lasted around 1 week, and after that I was kind of fine, and I was feeling like I had done that like forever. So this experience is one of the reasons why it made me think that the approach that the method that we use works well, and why it kind of connected as well with me as it did, and why I then decided to apply it and to use it to help other people learn languages.
Was there anything like specific about English, like parts of grammar or phrasal verbs or pronunciation? Anything? What did you find like particularly hard with English?
Yeah. So what was hard was not phrasal verbs. I find it very funny how some of the things that teachers insist a lot on teaching are not hard at all, especially if you learn in a more natural way.
Yeah.
So I never had any issues with phrasal verbs. Phrasal verbs just happen to be a word in the sense that the combination of the two words has a specific meaning that's just unique to that combination, and you can not look at each word separately. It just happens to be a word that's split into, and it's split into. It takes two positions in the sentence, but besides that, it's just a word. It's a different word, as long as you don't try to impose a meaning on it based on the original meaning of the original verb. You're going to be fine. You're just going to get used to that combination having that particular meaning, right? And something similar happened for words that sound similar to each other. For some reason, my French teachers, my English teachers tried to always taught us words that sound similar to each other in combination. Like they taught them to us at the same time. And that produced a lot more confusion than if they just had ignored them completely and just had let us learn them each word at its own time, at its own pace. And we probably wouldn't have even connected them to each other if we just had learned each word in its own context. But just the fact that the teachers taught them to us at the same time caused me to always have this doubt. And when I heard one of the words, or when I had to use one of the words, I would always have to go into my head and think of both words and whatever trick that I had memorized to distinguish them, to pick the right one, and then I could like use the right one, right? But my experience when learning Japanese, for example, is that I saw people that were confused by two words, and I had never had that confusion because I just had learned each word in its own context at its own time, and never really connected them to each other. So I think one benefit of learning in a more natural way like this is that some issues just never really even happen. You don't have to even worry about those things. One problem that I had with English because of how we learned was that I had learned many words by reading them, just by seeing them written and not by hearing them. So, but when you're reading a word, you still pronounce it in your head, even if you don't know how to pronounce it. You end up pronouncing it in a way or other. So I had just mislearned many words, and I kept saying those words wrongly for a long time. Like it took me years and years to fix many of those words, and I'm sure there's still many words that I learned that I'm still not pronouncing correctly because I just maybe haven't used enough, or they just don't come up enough in spoken conversation.
Yeah.
That if I were to say them, I would say them wrong. I would say like use the wrong vowel or the wrong, because in English it's just difficult. The words, basically how a word is written and how a word is pronounced, have a very loose connection, and many times you just have to learn each one separately, and that's it. You just have to learn it, right? So yeah, that's one thing that also I think you would benefit a lot from listening a lot to the language before you start reading in large amounts, let's say.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that. I mean, obviously Spanish is a phonetic language, meaning that the way words are spelled is kind of the same as how they're pronounced. English, of course, is a non-phonetic language, and like you say, the way that words are spelled is really not a very good indication as like how you're supposed to pronounce them. And so I think that this, particularly with English, like this method of like a long period of focusing on listening before you do other things, listening to comprehensible input before you start reading in your head, is like super important for English. Because, and I don't know why this is not known around the world, you know, in schools around the world. It seems like quite obvious to me that you should, with English in particular, you should start by listening. I'll try to think of a good example of a word, you know, just take the stressed syllables in words, you know, take a random word like development or something like that. In this case, the stress needs to go on the second syllable, right? Development. But if you learned that word by reading it silently in your head, you may, when you come to speak, then put the stress on the first syllable, and you may say something like awkward, like development or something. And then when you're having a conversation and you say, well, you know, the development of China is, and people are like, what did he say? What? What's that? And, you know, the stressed syllables and all the vowels, I just think it's so important for English learners to start with the listening. Can you think of any particular, I don't know if you're going to be able to remember, but can you think of any particular words that you kept mispronouncing again and again?
I remember one well, because this was after I had already studied for a whole year in Finland. I got a scholarship to do a master's degree in the US. And I remember I was roommate with a couple of American guys. And in one of our first conversations that we had, I was telling him about my exams, and it's not exams, it's exams.
Yeah.
And I somehow had managed to like not learn the pronunciation of that word correctly, even though I had already been in university in English for a whole year before that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Pablo, if you had used EnglishSponge to learn English, you would not have had that problem. So
yeah, you have to now travel in time to 20 years ago, and so it's available then.
Yes, we will do that. We will find a way. Thank you. I want to move on a little bit into like the method of learning comprehensible input. One of the biggest problems we have with EnglishSponge is literally just trying to explain like what this is and how you can learn a language through comprehensible input, because there is still a lot of confusion around like how it really works and stuff. So I've got some questions here like about that. Obviously, to cover the basics very quickly, comprehensible input is input where Pablo, correct me if I'm wrong, but where you can already understand at least officially like 95% of what you're listening to. Personally, I tell people if they can understand anywhere between 80 and 95%, they're kind of in the realm of comprehensible input. I like to be a bit more liberal with like the percentages, because I feel like in the real world, you can't always find like things that are like the way you understand like 95%. Would you say that's about a good explanation of comprehensible input, or would you make any corrections to that?
When I explain it in terms of listening to audio, listening to the spoken language, I usually don't talk about percentages and just say it's listening in which you can get the gist of the story. You can understand what's going on, even if you miss some details, even if you miss some specific words. Because, well, first off, when you're starting from zero, what in our case would be super beginner videos, you could know 0 words of Spanish, but you still are able to make progress because we make it very easy to connect specific words that we're repeating a lot with visual information, right? With pictures or images, drawings and stuff, and that's enough already to start acquiring vocabulary initially. The 95% number comes from research done at the SEG English School in Tokyo, in which they do extensive reading. They have a reading program. So when you're reading, it's basically the only context that you get that allows you to understand, let's say, the words, for example, that you don't know yet, are other words that you're also reading. So you have 0 information, kind of visual information or information about how the person is speaking, their emotion, their tone, etc., that you get when you're listening to somebody. So in that case, like the percent of words that you already know is easy to determine, and it's basically most of what's going to help your comprehension of the text. So in that case is for reading, you can say like 95% is kind of acceptable, 98% is preferable. But for listening, I usually don't use numbers because there's just so much additional information that's available to you, especially at the lower levels.
Good. And my next question is about subtitles. Okay, so what are your thoughts on subtitles? Should you be using subtitles when you're learning a language with comprehensible input, or is it better to have them turned off? Should you maybe use both, sometimes turn them off and sometimes have them turned on? What are your thoughts really on subtitles?
I recommend disabling them. In general, if you're a beginner or let's say early intermediate, you really want to be focusing on just hearing, because seeing the words written, it's very easy to kind of impose your own idea of how the letters should be pronounced from your own preconceptions of how the letters sound in your native language. And it's often just better. You can even start adding letters that are not there when native speakers pronounce them. So you could say, I've seen Spanish people say often instead of, or maybe in some dialects of English you actually say often. I'm not sure, but I think at least in some countries they say often, and you may start saying often, or in other words, maybe pronouncing letters that are not pronounced by English speakers, right?
Yeah.
So this is one example that I think applies particularly well
Pablo, very quickly,
English.
a good example of this, I think, is the word asked, which I believe when it's a common word, and you say like, he asked me, he asked him, she asked me, and whereas a native speaker generally does not really pronounce all the correct sounds in that word, instead of saying asked like this, generally we just sort of say asked. He asked me, she asked him. And I suppose if you learned just by listening, you would probably copy like what the exact way the native speaker did it, and you would probably start saying asked, he asked me, she asked me, him. But perhaps by reading it and you see the letter ASKED, you may want to say asked like it's written down. So I thought that was a good example.
Yeah, definitely. So it doesn't mean that you can like never turn subtitles on. I know that some people may kind of get an itch of, I really want to know what that word is that I've like heard so many times. And if it starts bothering you, so much that you kind of get distracted and are not focused on listening to the story. Like, sure, go back a bit and like turn on the subtitles and look at that word and just to check what it is. That's fine. But yeah, generally I recommend disabling them.
I think the reason a lot of people like to use subtitles is because it does allow you to increase the level of what you're listening to. And I think a lot of people are they want to jump ahead a bit, right? And to be fair, the higher level content is generally a bit more interesting than the lower level content, right? So while learning Spanish, I did often use subtitles. And the main reason being is just that it allowed me to move up a level a little bit. You can understand more with the subtitles. But I do agree, probably ideally you would listen without them. Although, to be fair, I don't know if it's a massive disaster to have them on. Like, I don't think it's going to cause big problems. Probably it may cause, maybe you may focus a bit too much on the spelling a little bit. But I would say it wouldn't be a big issue, right? More like a minor thing.
In general, I'm a bit suspicious. So I don't think we have hard data about this. So there's no like, today we're not going to come up with a definitive conclusion about this. But I'm suspicious of any kind of activity that asks you to do two things at the same time. And in this case, it would be listening and reading, right? Especially when reading itself is already kind of trying to create sounds in your head, but you're trying to listen at the same time. So I wouldn't be surprised if you even end up with kind of slower acquisition because you don't have as much mental capacity to allocate to actually trying to understand the meaning of what's being said.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never really thought about that. Yeah, it's true. Of course, we do have subtitles on this video here, and on many of the EnglishSponge YouTube videos, we do have subtitles. Honestly, the reason we put subtitles on our videos is only because people seem to watch them more. We wouldn't do that if YouTube people seem to watch a lot more when we do that. And yeah, most of our content doesn't have subtitles for that reason, right? We want people to have the option to listen and not be able to see the words down there. So most of our videos on the website don't have subtitles. It's just a YouTube thing, really. That's the only reason. Should you be taking notes while listening to comprehensible input? A lot of people, I've taught a lot of people now who have been watching our videos, and they usually tell me that they're taking notes, right? They're like writing down words that they've heard and stuff. So what do you think about taking notes while listening to comprehensible input?
We recommend not taking notes. We recommend just focusing on the content, trying to enjoy, trying to understand like what's being said, because I think inevitably if you're there for the purpose of learning certain words, like, I don't know, maybe you hear a word, maybe you heard it a few times and you think, oh, I really want to memorize this word. By that point, you haven't been paying attention to what's being said in the video for a few seconds. And if a word is common and is important, it will come up again. And it will come up in other situations. Because even if you try to brute force learning a word, you're not going to be able to get that exposition to the word, that exposure to the word in a bunch of different situations, in a bunch of different contexts, which is what you need to really know how to use a word naturally, the same way that native speakers use it in the right context, use it with the right people, with the right kind of formality setting, and there's so many nuances to kind of the range of meanings that a word can take, cannot take, and the whole kind of feeling that it gives to what you're saying, whether it's very polite, very impolite, all those things. You need to get a lot of exposure, not in a single sentence or in a single situation, but in many situations. So we recommend, in general, extensive listening, extensive reading, and not this kind of more intensive kind of studying, listening or reading, no, in both cases.
Yeah, I tend to tell people instead of spending this time taking notes and then looking at your notes and studying your notes, just use that time to just get more input, because it's, you know, like you said, it's not necessary to do anything except for listen, right? To actually acquire vocabulary, you don't need to do anything else really. I think a lot of people they just they want to feel like they are studying properly, which is why they feel like they need to take notes, because I think to them they feel like just by watching a video they feel like I'm not really studying properly, you know, and
You
so they
can
feel like
not see, you cannot see, get a like kind of visual measure of what you've learned, right?
yes, and also all through their experience of studying things at school, it's always involved sort of taking notes and looking at them and stuff. So this idea that you can learn a language just by listening to it is like if, to them it feels like they're being lazy or something, like they're not really studying properly. I think that's the hang up that people have about that. Should you be using a translator when you're learning through comprehensible input? Should you be opening up Google Translate and translating words? What do you think about that?
I don't think there's need for that. I can imagine a situation in which that may be useful if you're learning a language for which there's not a lot of content specifically for learners. Like if you're learning a language for which there's no YouTube channels for with content with videos at different levels or with enough content at each level, that may be necessary. But if you have a resource with like hundreds, thousands of videos in which you can find videos, you can always find new, interesting content at the level you're at. I never really see a need for that. Like I'm not seeing a need for that with my Chinese learning right now, or when I learned Thai in a school that used kind of the same approach but in a classroom. I learned all my Thai to the point of being fluent, being able to get by with like daily conversation without ever looking up a dictionary or translating any word or any sentence. So I don't think it's necessary if you have enough content, if you're learning a language that's kind of mainstream enough.
I suppose also,
so specifically not for
sorry.
English, probably you don't need.
Yeah, I suppose also you can't really translate between languages like with 100% accuracy, right? Like there's always going to be certain,
translations
yeah,
are always going to be mistaken in a way or another. And there's this risk that if you translate the meaning of words or of sentences, you're going to assume that one word matches a word in your language, and that's never the case. Like if you imagine the range of meanings that a word can take as kind of a shape, those shapes are never going to be overlapping like 100% on one another. The meaning of that word in your language is going to cover certain usages, certain meanings that the word in English or in the language you're learning doesn't cover, and vice versa. So there's always this risk that you're going to make assumptions and you're going to start using the word in a way that cannot be used.
Yeah, because really you've got two completely different language systems. This is the way I like to think about it, is you have different language systems. You would have the language system of Spanish, and then you have a completely different system of language in English. And that every time you try to translate across, like even if it's quite accurate, it's never going to be 100% accurate. There may be tiny little nuances that are like so small, but it's still not going to be completely accurate.
So this is my advice about like trying to use translation as an activity or a tool for language learning. I mean, you should definitely like use translation for, let's say, your daily life if you're living in a foreign country and you need it for practical purposes. Like there's nothing against that.
Yeah, if you have no other choice. Occasionally I translate words just because I'm impatient. Like obviously I want to know what the word means now, instead of sort of watching more input and waiting for it to come up again like 3 or 4 more times so I can properly acquire the word. It's really just out of impatience, and it's something I really should not do, honestly. but I'm just an impatient sometimes. But yeah,
Yeah, I
you're right.
recommend avoiding that because I've sometimes it's happened to me that the words that I learned naturally never really worried me, and I just started using them the same way native speakers use them. But if
Yeah.
for some reason I ended up either looking up a word or even like consciously thinking about, oh, this word probably matches this other word in English, then after that, every time I heard the word, I would think of the translation. And when you're every time you're thinking of the translation, you're now trying to impose the meaning of the translation on that onto that word instead of trying to get the context to kind of
Yeah.
impose the meaning of you, which is what usually should be happening. Yeah.
Yeah, an example, a couple of examples from Spanish is for a long time I was saying, I think, esperomente, which I believe is a word that doesn't exist. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think this word doesn't exist in
Yeah.
Spanish, I don't believe. But near the beginning, I didn't use the comprehensible input method. In the beginning,
Uh-huh.
I was speaking from day one. I was translating. I was doing all that, and I just made up this word esperomente, and it was
You
stuck
were trying to
in my.
say like hopefully or what?
Hopefully, yeah, because
Oh,
the
okay. Okay.
other words like raramente could be something like rarely.
Uh-huh.
It followed
Yeah,
every
I
time
can see
in
the
English.
logic. I can see the logic of to get there.
Exactly, and so I just made a
Uh-huh.
jump and I just started saying it, esperomente puedo, and it was only 2 years later when I had a lesson, and a teacher said, What are you saying?" And I was like, "Oh God, that's not correct. I've been saying it for 2 years," and that was a
Okay.
product of just speaking from day one. And is it okay to occasionally watch content that is like either above or below your current level? Like, is there anything to gain from watching things that are kind of above your level, or maybe things that are like too easy for you?
Okay. So I can start with below your level because I think it's easier to answer. And what I'm seeing myself when learning is that I can go quite a bit under my level or quite a bit under the kind of hardest videos that I can understand. And I'm still getting a lot of it, a lot from it. I'm still seeing new words, new expressions, reinforcing, because there's always more things that you need to reinforce that you can reinforce. And when I'm watching Chinese, I'm still watching the beginner videos and they're completely fine. I would say only the videos for like really people starting from zero that can be like super basic, super slow. Those maybe they're just not fun at all. Like they don't really even talk about anything interesting. So maybe those I'm not gonna watch. But as soon as it's a video in which either two people are having a conversation or there's some explanation about culture or anything that can be interesting, I'm probably gonna watch it. Maybe I'll increase the speed of the video, and this is something that it's like very good from modern technology. That basically in most places where you can watch video now, you can change the speed and make it slower or faster. So yeah, I find that from easier content, you can still get a lot. From harder content, it's gonna be not very effective in terms of how much you are acquiring. Like if you spend many hours watching mostly content that it's too hard for you, you're gonna slow down a lot your pace of acquisition. But it's still every now and then I think it's still a good thing. Some people just like doing it just to they say kind of to get a kind of reality check about how much they have left to learn to get to the point, let's say, to understand native speakers having a conversation. And sometimes you just wanna there's this one movie that you really like and you wanna just have this experience of watching it in its original language. Maybe you like watching it every now and then to get a feeling for how many words you are now understanding that you were not understanding before, and that's great. And I think I've done that with some movies in Chinese. I wouldn't spend a significant percent of my input time doing that, but doing it every now and then, I think it can be useful.
Yeah, I find that with watching content that is really easy for you, it gives you a chance to sort of notice some of the smaller details of the language that you can't notice when you're watching things at your level. Little details, like in Spanish, like the difference between like este, esta, esto. These kind of little words that when things are moving quickly, you just don't really have time to like pay
Yeah.
attention to.
The sounds kind of blend into each other a bit when speaking quickly.
Yeah, like it's all the same. Este, esto, something like that, But when you watch something that's really easy, then it gives your mind space to sort of like notice these little things. That's what I've found as well. So we've talked about sort of this method of comprehensible input. Schools around the world, okay, are teaching English like in every country. Obviously, they do it in Spanish as well, but with English, like every country in the world people are learning English at school, and they're basically all using the traditional method. Like everybody is using textbooks and more traditional methods. Do you think it would ever be possible for schools to sort of use or like adopt like a comprehensible input method in a classroom, like with children and teenagers? Like, could that actually ever happen, that people change to like a CI method in the classroom? What do you think about that?
I mean, there's, I think, two things. One is, in practice, does it work? And in practice, I think it can be made to work, and we can discuss a bit maybe the details of how that can be done. And then there's the whole kind of cultural aspect of like change. How do you change a culture? How do you change the school system, which may be different for each country, and it's too hard, and that's why I didn't do it. That's why I kind of started a project more for people who are interested on learning on their own, and I don't have to deal with kind of trying to change a system that I have no idea how it works or how hard it may be to change, right? You can do CI in the classroom. You can do, of course, the kind of two main ways of doing it is either pre-recorded content, videos, or a teacher in person giving it, right? And with pre-recorded content, there's many ways you can do it, and nowadays it's kind of easy to implement, but well, it's probably not as effective as if you actually have a person there talking to you about something that interests you and that you kind of have to pay attention to. Or maybe you don't have to, because I mean, children in school, many don't really pay much attention, but I would say more children, a higher percentage of children may be paying attention to a teacher talking to them than to just a video playing on the screen, right? But of course, having a person there provide you the input has requirements of like people who can speak the language well enough to teach it.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna get into whether the person needs to be a native speaker or not, but at least the person needs to speak well enough. If you want to get many people who speak the language well enough, or even if you want to get native speakers, then in practice that can be hard or impossible to achieve, depending which languages you're trying to teach, in which countries. It just could be kind of unfeasible. Over time, that may improve if enough people, let's say in the country, learn English because the methods are improving. That could also lead into having better teachers in the future to teach the next generation, kind of. But yeah, there's of course all these practical considerations, right?
Yeah, I don't think there are enough native English speakers or teachers to go around every country in the world, or enough native teachers who are willing to move to, somewhere,
move somewhere, maybe get a smaller salary.
Yeah. Exactly. So yeah, practically speaking, it may be impossible, but videos are of course a good idea, but there are lots of factors, right? Like, are children going to actually pay attention when you just press play on a video? And I suspect they may just do not pay attention at all. Right? Maybe. I just want to know a bit about grammar. Okay. you know, generally when people, their approach to improving their grammar is to do grammar exercises, like fill in the blank exercises, or like multiple choice questions where you have to say, is it have been or is it was? And you have to circle like the correct answer. Or maybe people try to learn like the rules and like remember what is the rule. But can grammar be learned like just through input? Is it actually possible to improve your grammar without studying grammar at all?
Well, yeah, it is. I've done it. I've learned multiple languages this way, so it is for sure. It is one of the reasons why this kind of approach clicked with me so well, because before I even learned what comprehensible input is, I learned Japanese with a method that was made popular or even kind of invented by a blogger, and the blog was called All Japanese All the Time. And that also included a kind of flashcard review part to it that I ended up not working very well for me. So in the end, I stopped using it very, very early on. But then there was the part of input, of just like watching a lot in the language. And it was not comprehensible input. That guy kind of recommended just switching your whole life to Japanese, and you'll just learn it. Now I know that if that input is comprehensible, it's gonna happen quicker. But at that point, that's what I knew, and I did it, and it worked very well for me. And the reason why I even tried was because my experience, having learned English before that, showed me that I had acquired quite a lot of grammar, of English grammar, that I had never learned in school. And I remember this even in Finland, even my first year abroad using English daily, that I was using some sentences in a way that I had never learned in school. I was using things like should, the word should, in a way that we had never been taught in school. You can use should for things that kind of happen frequently. And this is kind of a sentence pattern that we had never learned in school. And I just was doing it because I just had seen that kind of sentence so many times. And then I went on to do that in Japanese. The difference is that in English, I started in school and I only used input to then get to kind of a higher level, right? But for Japanese, I did it from zero and it worked. And I acquired grammar that people usually learning Japanese struggle so much to learn. The difference between wa and ga is like the biggest thing when learning Japanese, when teaching Japanese. And for me, it was never an issue. I was just got used to it naturally and never really had a doubt or like mix them up. So I know that you acquire grammar. I mean, of course, all children acquire grammar this way, right? Mm-hmm. But I know that even as an adult, you can still do it because, yeah, I've done it with several languages, and quite a few of our students have done the same for Spanish.
Yeah, and of course, the way that it works is that like the grammar is a natural thing that grew naturally in the language, right? And it was only afterwards where like academics sort of started labeling things like present perfect, past simple, and stuff. Like people have been using the present perfect tense for thousands of years. I'm not sure about that. People have been using the present perfect tense for hundreds and hundreds of years. And then probably within the last couple of 100 years, like an academic said, okay, if you say I have been to Spain, that is called the present perfect tense. So I think that grammar can be learned naturally. And one other thing, I just want to have a rant a little bit about how much I personally hate grammar tests and grammar questions. Like so many times, like the questions themselves actually don't make sense. Like when I saw a grammar question just the other day with Spanish that said, how do you say last week in Spanish? That was it. How do you say last week? And two of the options were la última semana, and the other one was la semana anterior, or la semana pasada.
Okay.
And apparently the correct answer was la semana pasada. But I was thinking, hold on a second,
Well,
if the set,
the
you know,
correct answer is it depends on this context.
exactly, I was thinking that if the sentence was like, this is the last week I'm going to attend this class, the correct answer would be la última semana, right? I think that's, and so I've had a lot of the time students show me the grammar test that they've been given, like from their teacher. And in many cases, I'm looking at the thing and I literally don't know the correct answer. I'm like, I honestly don't know. This question doesn't make any sense. And this is so common with these grammar tests. Like the actual question, the way it's designed is like, it doesn't actually make sense when you look at it. And this kind of thing like adds another layer of complexity to learning a language that it just doesn't need to be there. It's completely pointless. That's the end of my rant. Okay.
Okay.
And so I'll move on to the last question. What are your future plans with dreaming? Now you have dreaming Spanish, you have dreaming French. What kind of plans do you have for the future? And will we be seeing dreaming English at any point within the next few years? Tell me about that.
So our plans include starting more languages, and of course the most obvious ones are ones in which we can just clone what we have right now and kind of target the same kind of audience that we already have. So that's why we did French, because there's a lot of overlap between our kind of previous customer base and the kind of people who would both want to learn French and already know about comprehensible input, right? So continuing to do that would be the most obvious thing. Eventually, we also want to do English. The issue with English is that people who want to learn English, it's a completely different market, right? So first, it's people who are in countries that right now we don't have many customers in. If they don't know English, most people are not going to be familiar with the concept of comprehensible input, because I think the knowledge about comprehensible input has become kind of maybe not widespread, maybe not like mainstream, but most people who know about it are English speakers or people who already learned English well, even if they're not native speakers.
Yep.
Because since we started, maybe since 2017, both us and even some other like YouTube channels and other kind of famous people have mentioned it, have talked about comprehensible input. It has become a lot more well known. But this has happened in the kind of Anglosphere, in the English-speaking world, but not as much in other countries, among people who don't speak English already. So there will be quite a bit of work there of teaching people about comprehensible input. When I started Dreaming Spanish, I started a blog and started explaining like the whole idea, the whole theory of how things work, how you acquire it, and all that work now would need to be replicated for people who want to learn English in like hundreds of different countries, and each country is kind of a different market. So we would have to find how to promote ourselves in all those different countries. And I don't know how to do that. And we will have to learn how to do that.
Good. So we won't be having competition from Dreaming English for a while yet. That's good. That's good to know. Thank you very much, Pablo. That's probably the end. So thank you for coming today, and thank you for making Dreaming Spanish. As I said, it is like the main inspiration behind EnglishSponge. So thanks for that. And everybody, all the guides at EnglishSponge, we have all used Dreaming Spanish. I've recently signed.
Cool.
Yep, that's right. Every single one of us. I think we're at different levels, but for example, Sam is like an advanced Spanish speaker. Myself and Alia from America, we're kind of like B2 level, and we have some of us are like B1, and so we've all come through Dreaming Spanish. So thanks for that. Thanks for making Dreaming Spanish. And that's it. Any last things to say before we finish today? Anything else?
No, maybe just some general advice for language learners that if you try to do the kind of fun stuff and not so much the painful stuff, you'll usually gonna want to spend more time with the language. You're gonna be more motivated to get more input every day, to not give up, to continue getting lots and lots of hours of input, and are much more likely to get good at the language. So yeah, I recommend being lazy and just doing the fun stuff.
Hey, how can you argue with a message like that? That sounds fun. Thanks, Pablo. Thanks for coming on. And thanks, everybody, for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.